Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lauren Guerra, and I have an amazing guest today. I have Doctora Judith Rocha from Chicago with us. Yay! um, Dr. Rocha and Doctora Rocha and I met many, many moons ago at the Latin American Studies Conference in Peru, randomly enough. That was a trip. That was an epic trip. So
Beautiful.
much fun. It's so beautiful. And so a little background of who Doctora Rocha is. She is a social worker and professor at Northeastern Illinois University. And I'm super happy that she's joined us today. I'm so grateful. Yay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Doctora. I really appreciate you. Can you believe it's been 7 years since that?
That's crazy. It's been a long time. Yeah. Um, it's so wild. I remember actually on that trip, I was in my Airbnb being Zoom interviewed with a faculty member at UCLA for to start teaching in the Chicano Studies department at UCLA.
Look,
Full circle moment. It's so wild that kind of began my ethnic studies teaching chapter, if you will. Cool.
Wow. Beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah, that was a beautiful trip. I think I felt especially connected because my dad's side of the family he's from Ecuador, while Peru obviously is a different country. Just that Andean energy, vibe, culture. It was so amazing. I did kind of feel very connected and at home there. So it was super fun. Awesome. Yay. So, Doctora Rocha, I'm going to invite you to share with us a little bit about who you are. So, on the podcast, I really focus on faith and culture, especially because Latinas are so diverse. And I really want to highlight how diverse we really are as far as like backgrounds, upbringings, even geographically. Those are all different experiences. So, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So, in preparation for today, I know that you have a series of questions for us, right? And so that started to take me on a path to really just put everything into context, even for myself, because I think, so many times when it comes to things that you're just living in the moment or living it and not really paying so much attention to the different elements of it, right? So for me personally, I identify as a Mexicana born in Chicago. It took me a little bit to arrive at that, but that is essentially how I feel. Obviously, not only in terms of the heritage that I have been given through my family line, but even legally. I mean, I made it a point to seek out my dual citizenship, right? So even in paper, because it's just a part of, who I am. And so I wanted to make sure to solidify in any way that I could. And I add that piece of Mexicana born in Chicago because I think so many times within the context of this country, migration stories differ, right, in terms of geography. And so you many times hear about the stories of folks from the Southwest and from, Mexicans from California, Mexicano, maybe from New Yorkers, right, on the East Coast, Cubans in La Florida. Sure. And in Chicago, we have a pretty strong hold on our demographic here, particularly in this city, a Chicagoland area, because now we have to consider the suburbs as well. That we are a third of the population. And so in terms of Latinas, Latinos, Latines, right, Mexicans, so Mexicanos and Mexicanas in that, is definitely on one of the higher percentages. So maybe about, 70% of the Latina community in the Chicagoland area is Mexican. And it's oftentimes that we don't see our history reflected in whether that's the teachings in our schools, whether that's even knowing our migration stories, right? Because maybe you've been removed from it by a generation or two. Yeah. And so it takes us a little while to just kind of get to that moment in our life where we're that curious to really just try to find the information because it's not readily available necessarily.
Absolutely. There's a effort involved, right? It's an intentional seeking out of information, of, finding that identity. I love the fact that you have your dual citizenship. I think that's so amazing. That's something that we've talked about with my family, about getting dual citizenship for Ecuador and Guatemala. So interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just that the concept of identity, borders, like the whole thing is very, very bizarre. It's like unique, right? It's definitely constructed. It's probably the better word for it.
Right.
Socially constructed.
Right. Most definitely.
Wow. Amazing. What was that process like? Like, yeah, I'm super curious. Like how did it come to be, rather? Like how did it evolve?
So I will say that the biggest motivation for it was so that I could visit Cuba. And
Oh,
so
nice.
when I was wrapping up
Interesting.
my master's program in 2005,
Oh,
I
cool.
wanted to give myself that gift of
I
traveling to
love
Cuba
it.
that year. And so I don't know if it was maybe about a year before that or half a year before that, there was more mention at that point in time about how folks that had gained their citizenship through amnesty,
Hmm.
because they essentially had to deny their Mexican citizenship
Right.
at that point, right, when they went through their process of naturalization, that they would be able to regain it. And so there
Mm.
was this whole like push to have Mexicanos do that, Mexicanos. And so I supported my mom in that process at that point. And I'm like, well, by the way, since we're here
Yeah.
at the Mexican consulate, can we look at doing
What you
this?
mean?
So yeah, so
Perfect.
essentially it was just having parents that are, whether it's Mexican nationals or nationals from other countries,
Hmm.
um, provide the supportive evidence, right, that they are nationals from those countries, and
Hmm.
then move forward through the process at the consulate.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
and
so
they even gave me
interesting.
a birth certificate that's
Oh,
Mexican, yeah, which
I
I
love
found very
it.
interesting. I'm like, okay, I mean, I really only just needed the passport, but sure,
I
give me
love
that
it.
birth
I love
certificate.
it. I love it. That's amazing. That's so
Yeah,
cool. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's good for you. I think that's really, really great. Oh
yeah.
man, super cool. Now I'm like remotivated. I'm like, I gotta do that too. Yeah, because we
Get
have
out.
some family members who have done it. Well, it's ironic. I call them my cousins, but we're not actually blood related. You know how it goes.
Yeah, yeah,
But
I hear.
yeah, and I mean, granted, they've gone to Ecuador much more, regularly, frequently. But it's cool. I think it's so great. I love it. I love that idea. It's so funny. Sometimes I really feel like I'm more likely to move abroad than I am to go to another state in the US. I just have always felt more at home. And I've shared this before. Uh, like living in Spain, which again, that was complicated. I was there for grad school, but it's like that's the colonial, right? Like that's the evil empire. What do you mean you like it there? What do you mean you feel at home there? I'm like, the history is complicated, right? History is complicated. Felt very embraced and way more welcome in Madrid than I ever have felt in other states in the U.S. or even even in Los Angeles. I'm like, oh, I don't
Interesting.
know. It's a trip. It's a trip. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to anybody else, but that's okay. Like,
No, I think it does because you're not the first person that I've heard that from.
really, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It is. It is. It's
and I wonder if it's because you just made me remember. So the first time that I went to the LA area, I felt the same. I was like, oh my gosh, it was like the heavens opened up for me. Like
really how
I was like,
funny.
look at this world where I feel like I fit perfectly, right?
Yeah.
Where, coming back to Chicago at that point, I was like, oh my goodness. It has
Wow.
definitely evolved since then because I want to say that might have been late 90s, early 2000s. So it's been over 20 years, right? And
Wow.
ever since then, that's
Yeah.
been kind of my go-to whenever I want to just kind of do a quick trip somewhere. I'll
That's so
head
cool.
to Southern California. And now I'm doing more trips to Northern California as well.
Oh,
But
fun. Yeah, the
um,
Bay Area is the best. I love
yeah,
it.
but I
Yeah.
wonder if it's that, right? Like you're in that space, you're in that
Mhm.
created environment, and then you remove yourself
Mhm.
from there and are taken somewhere else where you feel more fully embraced for one reason or another, right? Like it's
Yeah, for
yeah.
one reason or another. Um, I mean, I think it's a couple things. Like many people, I know for sure that like I don't know if it was like my great grandparents or someone were from Spain and Portugal,
Oh,
and so
okay.
it is there. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like as far as like the
of
family
course.
tree, if you will.
Right.
And it's funny, my mom and my aunt, one of my aunts, my mom used to dance flamenco when she was younger, and my aunt used to play a flamenco guitar together. Like that was
Oh,
something that they did like for
sweet.
fun, you know.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then on top of it, as you know, like in studying Spanish in school, most textbooks focus a lot on Spain, right? The art of the Prado, this, you know, paella, this, all these different things about Spain. So it kind of reinforced that familiarity.
Right.
If I'm tongue tied. So I don't know. It just felt very comfortable. And something that I've mentioned before in the podcast is that Los Angeles is Chicano and Mexican American focused.
Right.
Yes, there's right, like yes, there's Central Americans, right? Like yes, there's Salvadorians, yes, there's Guatemalans, there's people from everywhere, all over the world. However, in terms of like culture, I think it predominates, right?
Yeah.
And so being someone who is Guatemalan Ecuadorian,
Mhm.
I didn't know a lot of people, right? I didn't know a lot of people with those identities or
Right.
spent time with them outside of my own family. So
Right.
it's interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and they say in Spanish, la sangre llama, right? So I mean,
Yes.
obviously
Oh,
that descendancy, that lineage for you is very prominent
yeah.
in that setting, and so
Yeah.
I could see how you would feel, like there's something there that just draws you
For
to
sure.
that space.
For
Yeah.
sure. For sure. Yeah. Like I I would move back in a heartbeat for sure. Oh my gosh.
Well,
Um yeah.
consider.
Let's see what life has in store. It would be super fun. But let's see. Okay, so speaking of culture, something that I think is so integral and connected to Latinx culture is religion, right? For
Mhm.
better or for worse, right? That connection between religion and faith. Yes, I see Guadalupe. Yay. And you know what? We can even start there. Like I love Guadalupe because she breaks through barriers,
Mhm.
right? I love her because for people who are not religious, she is still very special. For people who are super religious, she is very, very special, right? And so I love that she can connect to so many people in their lives, in their hopes and dreams and things like that. Like she's so important. The feast day of La Virgen de Guadalupe was very recently, earlier in December, as we're recording. And so, yeah, I would love to hear from you a little bit about your own understandings of like religion, faith, spiritual practices, whatever you feel like sharing with us. That would be amazing.
Sure, definitely. So as many families coming from the Mexican connection. Our family grew up in the Catholic church, essentially, well, quote unquote church, because I have to be honest, my mom was not the most active in the church community.
Hey,
And
yeah,
yeah,
it's all
and
good.
so I always wondered, like, okay, well, if this is our religion, then why aren't we more involved, right? Or why are we always getting to church to mass late? Because that was like her signature. Like it
Right.
wouldn't matter if there was like 20 minutes left, we would still be walking in at that time.
Yeah.
Um, as long as she got the blessing, I guess that's what she
Yeah,
was looking for.
yeah.
But I grew up with obviously following through with the sacraments. I was baptized into the Catholic religion. I did my first communion as a child, and then actually that was it. That's where it stopped. I during schooling, I went through public schools throughout
Mm-hmm.
my education, and so
Oh,
seeking out stuff like the confirmation
mm-hmm.
um, then needed to be something more intentional on my part, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I let it sit there because I was
Mm-hmm.
always questioning a lot about religion and
Mm-hmm.
particularly Catholicism and Christianity. And to this day, that's still the case. But there
Yeah.
was this moment in time where I felt compelled to dive right into it and just learn more about it. And that's when I sought out confirmation. And so I remember to this day, I remember that Easter vigil. That was
Wow.
the one and only Easter vigil that I've ever been present to.
Wow.
It was like a 3 or 4 hour long mass.
It's the long, yeah, it's the longest mass ever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I gotta be honest, it didn't feel that long to me. Like, I know other people were probably like, when is this gonna be over? Because I don't think my family had ever been to an Easter vigil. And so when they came to support me, because that was the day I was getting
Oh,
confirmed, I felt like I was on top of the world, right? Like,
that's beautiful.
it was
Oh, I
such
love
a
that.
connection, right? To be able to just solidify where I was leaning into with my
Mm,
own thoughts around faith. But then, as things continued in my life, I still have this sense of questioning different elements and the way that religion has impacted and religious groups have impacted particular communities, right? And so,
yeah.
in these last few years, and I don't know if it's as a result of my mom's passing and me wanting to
Mm,
lean more into my ancestral line.
mm,
I've started to dig a little deeper in terms of indigenous practices of
mm,
spirituality, right, and my
mm.
connections to nature specifically that are more intentional because I've always had an affinity, like a real strong sense of wanting to be in nature, and
That's
so
beautiful.
now with this element of bringing the two together with
Mm,
spirituality has really supported my journey in terms of
mhm,
redefining or
mhm,
maybe embellishing, just really blossoming my thoughts around faith and
I
my
love it.
thoughts with regards to spirituality. So I've always felt that my life is like this duality, right? Like having been
Mm,
a daughter of immigrants coming into this country, so learning from mom's lived experience and then
mhm.
essentially walking my own path here because I'm the only one of my siblings that was born in the States. I'm the
Oh,
youngest in the family, right? So
oh,
everybody else was
wow.
already born by the time that I came around.
Yeah. Oh my
And so I
goodness.
had to navigate a lot of these dualities in my life. And they
Mhm,
started with that piece, right? They started with my upbringing here in this country. And then it moves into, right, my duality with my sense of connection with language. I
mm,
am very much a proponent of you want to at least be bilingual. Like you could be, multilingual, beautiful, but really emphasizing the need to have uh, la lengua, sí, colonizadora del español, right? But
yeah.
it really brings a sense of community for me when I'm able to
Mhm.
surround myself with folks that can share in that language experience. So duality with the language, and then now, right, with this sense of my spirituality and faith, I really see now I'm I find myself at peace when I'm
Mhm.
able to pray a rosario at a
Mm.
novena, right? Like that piece is something that really moves me. And then I'm also finding um, my peace with burning sage and and having copal as a method of cleansing
Mhm.
my home and myself in different difficult moments, right? So there's
Yeah.
that element of duality even in this.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I love that. I love everything that you've shared. Yeah, I think it's such a personal journey. I think that everyone goes through their personal journey, be it with religion or with more ancestral practices, things like that. I think that's incredible. Yeah, nature is very powerful. I think a lot of people, myself included, find that connection with nature. Now people talk about like, oh, grounding, I need to like ground, spend time in nature. That's an ancient practice. You know what I mean? We're using new age words, but that is really an ancient practice. Yeah. So for me, I feel most if we're talking about nature, I feel most like invigorated and blessed being in water, being around water, being at the beach. Like it's really, really powerful. It could be because one of my signs is a water sign. Like my rising sign is a Cancer sign, so it makes sense. Oh,
Yeah.
and I have a Venus in Pisces. Hello. Yeah. So I have a lot of water. Fire and water are very heavy in my chart.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your zodiac sign? I'm super curious as we're talking about
I'm
this.
Aquarius, and I have no idea the other parts.
Yeah.
Because people are
Aquarius.
like, "What's it?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super fascinating. Like the last couple of years, I've gotten super into tarot.
Right,
Super into
right.
tarot and like all things astrology. I love it. Oh, that's so cool. So I'm an Aquarius moon. That's why we click, girl.
I wouldn't doubt
That's
it.
awesome. That's
I
super
wouldn't
cool.
doubt
But yeah, I really appreciate what you shared. So remind me now, when you did your confirmation, was it through a parish or like, yeah? Oh,
it.
cool. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah,
I
that
love
was
it.
in, I want to say, let me see, 20, maybe like 2011, 2012, somewhere around there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a really important
Fantastic.
moment for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that it is, especially so because when we make that conscious choice, right? So I'm gonna kind of sort of parallel it to, like, for example, when someone chooses to go to college, maybe when they're a little bit older, right? Where it's not because mom and dad made me go to college. It's like, no, I have worked for a long time. I finally am going to commit to getting my education. Paralleled, right? In the sense that it is a conscious choice. It is that empowerment of like, this is important to me. I'm going to go do it. And so I love the fact that you did your confirmation out of your own free will. Like you
Mhm.
chose to go and do that sacred rite. That's super cool. I didn't do my confirmation until I was a freshman in college, so I'm with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Definitely a moment
yeah.
for
Mostly
sure.
because of bad experiences at my home parish. I was like, oh no, but that's a story for another day. Cool. Oh, and I also wanted to highlight what you mentioned about language. So the topic of language, right? And obviously, like the topic of Spanish is a sensitive one, because I know there's a ton of people that for a lot of reasons, right? The sense of like assimilation, families wanting to fit in and assimilate. They didn't teach their children Spanish. They
Right.
wouldn't, and also getting in trouble. Kids would get in trouble at school for speaking Spanish, getting in trouble at work for speaking. Totally, I get that. And so I appreciate what you shared, though, in terms of feeling like that has allowed you to connect even more deeply with like friends, family, community members, because you're able to speak to them in Spanish.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And well, and to your point about, like there's different times in this country where the language piece was very, very much a difficult, would put people in very difficult
In danger,
situations,
yeah.
right? And so, like,
Hmm.
I think even my name, right, like Judith Susan, like, where does that come from? But I was born in the, what was it, like mid to late 70s, 77.
Hmm.
And thinking back, I actually have classmates that I remember like going through grade school, and their names were completely English. And I think it was because of the times, right? Like at that point in time, I remember mom would always, in the early 80s,
Yeah.
there was always this big fear of like la migra, right? And they could be
Oh,
anywhere and
oh yeah.
and be a threat to our communities. And unfortunately, I'm like, is that what this next 4 years are going to be, right? Because um, it's just
It's
getting to that
scary.
point again,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of reason as to why people are nervous. You know, I think that I'm an optimist at heart, and so I'm hoping that good miracles will happen, and things will be okay, as okay as they can be, right? Given everything. But yeah, it's so interesting. So from teaching, you may have noticed this too, from teaching over the years on the roster, right? The
Mhm.
the choice of names of like, please call me Mike, but then they have a very like for lack of a better word, a very cultural, like ethnic name as is their real name, right? So again, this is a common thing, right? Like, oh, I have my English name or my American name. I notice that a lot with a lot of students, especially I would say especially like Asian American students,
Yeah.
Asian students. It's very, very,
Mhm.
very, very common. It's like, oh, I go by Lizzie, but then it's a totally,
Mhm.
beautiful, like um a totally beautiful name. But I think also because the mispronunciation,
Right.
people's names get totally like wrecked, and it's sad, and that's the thing is like, it's very frustrating because sometimes people will not take the time to try, or they will not take the time to learn how to pronounce it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not right. That's not right. Like, be it teachers, bosses, whoever, it's like, oh, I'm going to call you this instead because it's just too hard to call you your real name. No, that's not cool. It's a thing.
Unacceptable. Yeah,
It's a thing. Yeah.
completely. Completely.
Oh man. Oh my goodness. This is so good. It's so fun talking with you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. So one of the things I always try to talk about on the podcast, in addition to like culture and faith, is the inner niña, right? So the little girl inside, the inner me, reparenting the inner me, all those kind of things. I think for many of us, especially if we grew up in immigrant families or in general, I feel like most of my friends and colleagues have gone through different kinds, but difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
By virtue of being immigrants, by virtue of being first generation, second generation, etc. And so I always like to make space and take a moment to ask, like, what advice would you give yourself, like young Doctora Judith, or what advice would you give to young Latinas today in general? Like, what's kind of, you could approach it either way, but I would love to know.
Sure, definitely. And I don't know if again, back to the some of the questions that you posed to me before this to prepare. I don't know if that's the reason why I said what I said, but it's interesting that, so I mentioned to myself, okay, well, what would I say? I will confess, I'm not an avid reader. I never liked reading. I don't even know how I got through school because I really didn't like reading.
Oh my God.
But then, exactly.
Yeah.
How does this happen? There's hope for you all, people. I do not like reading. I'm sure you've managed. So and again, even to what you said before, full circle moment. One of the times that I went to California, that I was there for 3 months in Santa Monica specifically, I went to be a live-in nanny for someone that I knew from here, because they were going back. The woman was she worked in the movie industry as a set designer. And so in order to, and I promise this will take me back to the point that I'm making, in order for her to get back into her, or to keep her insurance, she needed to get back and do a project. Yeah. She had a child while she was here. And the child was like 2, I think, at the time. And so she needed to do it before a certain time. Right. And so rather than putting her child in childcare out there at a whole new environment, she wanted to bring someone with, right? So I came with, agreed for 3 months to stay with them and be a live-in nanny. And so what I would do was every afternoon once she got home, I'd be like, peace, I'm out. I would go out, right? Because I'm getting to know all the beauty that Southern California has. And I would go to the library to be able to get internet so that I could like check email and just, whatever. And I remember one of the first times that I walked in, there was a table. And so this was May, because I was there from May to August. It must have been in May at some point. Whole table of books by authors that were Latine, right? So it was like folks like Octavio Paz and Isabel Allende and Sandra Cisneros, which is one of the ones I'm going to mention in a bit. So different authors, and speaking to the type of things that I would probably be interested in. So what I ended up doing was I checked out some books, and then I'm like, okay, I do like reading. I think it's just I've never particularly put attention to what I am actually reading, right? So before it was really very much connected to whatever teachers wanted us to read for school assignments. I never really made it a point to like seek out particular novels or even nonfiction stuff, right? That spoke to me. And so that's where my realization came to me, that it's like, no, it's really about the content, right? So my current self would tell my younger self, look for books that are written
that you
by,
like.
yeah, that are written by Latinas, that are written by Black women, that are written by, Indigenous folks,
Yeah.
First Nation people, people of color, right? To be able to feel yourself immersed in the characters and in the storylines, because I think
Representation.
that
Yep.
piece of, right,
Representation means everything. Yeah.
yeah. So that makes a big difference for
I love
me,
it.
in terms of, being able to see who I am in this world. And so I remember one of the first books growing up that absolutely loved, and to this day
Mhm.
still love, is Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street. And, Sandra
Mm.
Cisneros grew up in Chicago, right? So it was a
Yep.
Mexicana that was growing up in Chicago, her
Yes.
own
Yes.
lived experience, she talks about how her family would drive to Mexico during summers, right? And it was like a
Hmm.
whole journey.
Hmm.
And it really resonated with me. And so then
Yeah.
obviously, like,
She's
that
amazing.
piece of her is sprinkled throughout her writings, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and coincidentally, today is her 70th birthday. I saw it this morning and I was like, oh my gosh, things just
Oh
tied
my God, full circle. I'm telling you. No, it's funny. I was on Instagram earlier and I must have seen the same picture.
together.
I think I saw the same picture. It was a birthday pose of her celebrating being 70 years old.
Uh,
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. I love her. And similarly, like I've always loved her books. She is an incredible author. Her and Ana Castillo, I've always enjoyed
Mhm.
their writing very much. Yeah, and it's so funny. Like, wow, this is kind of wild. I was at the library yesterday, and I was walking by like the Spanish language section. I was like, huh, I haven't read a book in Spanish in a really long time. Like, I was like, geez, that's terrible. Speaking from someone who like, I was gonna say a whole ass. I'll say it anyway. Whatever. I did a whole ass master. Right? I did a whole ass master's in Spanish
Right.
on novel, and I have not read a book in Spanish in, God, dare I say, like at least 2-3 years. Oh,
Right.
how embarrassing. So I was like, I need to remedy this. So I got like, I definitely picked up at least like one book in Spanish. I was like, this is ridiculous. Because yeah, it's different. It's different language.
Mhm.
I feel like language is alive. You know what I mean? Like the spirit of a language, communication, uh, you know what the author is trying to say. It's different. I think it's different in every language. I think it's so beautiful. I always tell people, I'm like, if you can read something, whatever it is, in the original, do that.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
If it was written in French, written in Italian, written in Arabic, whatever, if you can read it in that language, go for it, because you're going to get really like what the author was trying to communicate
Yeah.
versus a translator. Because translation, it's never going to be 100%.
Right. But definitely
It's
there.
not. It's going to be close, and a good translator will get you close, but it's not going to be exactly the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think we owe it to ourselves, right, to really stimulate our brain. And
Yes.
so we get comfortable. We get comfortable in
Yeah.
just doing things a certain way. And so it's always really good to just challenge ourselves a little bit more to see,
Yeah.
can you
Sure.
pick up a different language so you can read that book, right? In
Yeah.
its original, yeah, in its original language. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel super nerdy. I'm like, man, I should have taken Latin when I was. I'm like, oh God. Like, but really, I'm like, that would have been kind of cool. Hey, who knows? I may do that just for fun. Who knows? Like, oh man,
Yeah. And well, to answer, because that's what I would tell myself is
I love it.
read stuff. But I'm
There's
thinking, what would I tell just young girls at this point?
a lot going on right now. This is a wild
Yes,
world we're in right now.
there is. I would say, please, please learn to love who you are as a person, and with everything that you bring, because every element of
Mm,
who we are is beautiful. It's, there's so much out there that we're always compared to, or that we compare ourselves to. And we have to realize, there's no one size fits all for anything, right?
Yeah.
We all have our own journeys. We all have our own stories,
Totally.
and so we really need to love who we are as we are,
Yeah.
and sure, we'll evolve, right, as we live through different things, but
Hmm.
we really need to just bring that love to inward as much as we can.
Absolutely. I love that. It's true, and yeah, we'll hear the words like thrown around, self-love, self-care. It's like, no, no. But really, like what does it mean to really love who you are in your imperfection, in the things that you're working on, in
Mhm.
your gifts, in your talents, the whole thing, the whole package, not just part of it, you know,
Mhm.
um that takes time. I think it's a whole journey of growing up and maturing,
Yeah.
and it makes me a little bit concerned slash sad as far as like young people today. Why? Because comparison is a thief of joy, and
Mhm.
now thanks to the freaking cell phones, they're
Mhm.
young people are constantly bombarded and
Yeah.
feeling bad, like, oh man, I don't have the newest clothes, oh man, my mom does not drive a Mercedes Benz, oh man, da 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 da, right? Oh geez, we don't have a mansion, like every day, like
Mhm.
blasted, right?
Right.
Like all day long. And bullying too, that's gotten out of control. I talk to people who, I don't have children, but people who are parents, and even I'm teaching at the college level, so it's a bit different. But even when I was teaching high school some years ago, like the bullying is nonstop because there's no escape.
Yeah.
Before it's like, oh, the bully was at school. It's like, no, now the bully and the bully's friends can find you online 24 hours a day. Anyway,
Right.
that is to say that I think it is, I agree with you 1000% that finding ways to embrace oneself, to love oneself deeply, to embrace your flaws, work on the things that you care to, all, again, no one's perfect, but even in that process, right? Even in that process to give love to oneself
Yeah.
in that growth process. I think that is really incredible advice. I
Right.
love it.
Mhm.
Yay. Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Very, very cool. I love it. Um, yeah, this was lovely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr.
No, I
Judith
appreciate
Rocha.
it so much. And, this platform, I really, and I had shared with you, right? I'm not someone that is so into podcasts. I have this tendency of not looking for them. But I really appreciate when folks are this intentional to put out platforms and spaces. Because I mean, with our world now and how technology has both brought us, to a different level of isolation, but then
Mhm.
also connected us in so many ways.
Right?
It's
Oh,
so miraculous. It's
it
like,
is. It is.
oh
It
my
is.
gosh, if you're, someone that has some messages to share, get on here,
Yeah,
like do the different things that you can
totally.
to get those out, because I think it's, we owe it to ourselves to keep connecting
Totally.
with content that we really feel close to.
Yeah.
It's definitely a beautiful space, and thank you. I really appreciate it and feel
Thank
honored that you
you.
thought to invite me on.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like at first I was hesitant because I was like, there's 1,000 podcasts already, right? I was like, no, but they're not going to talk about what I'm talking about, and they're not me, right? The hosts are not me. So that in and of itself is going to make it different.
Yeah.
And yeah, like over the episodes, so this is already, I'm very excited. This is season 3 already. And
Wow.
so it's pretty, I mean, it's pretty cool. And I'm just honestly like, I'm so oh, that's a new word. I'm so proud of I'm so proud of my friends and colleagues and everyone that have been on the podcast. I'm like, man, these are some kick-ass women. Like all of the, from therapists to people in finance to publishers to, like, wow, these are all Latinas doing amazing things. And I think that in and of itself is important to share with the world.
Right.
And to, yeah, to kind of demystify, right? Demystify the boxes of culture and religion and that, oh, we're all the same. Oh, we do it. Not at all. Like this is like a variety of amazing experiences
Yeah.
and knowledge and stuff like that. So it's been cool. It's been a fun journey.
Oh, it's beautiful. And you know what? We talked about the whole representation piece, right? Like, I think it's really important to demystify
Mhm.
this whole journey to doctorhood, right? Because I always
Yes.
wonder, like, how do people see me? I'm the Judy that grew up in, a Mexican enclave in Chicago, right? Grew up in poverty and single mom, right? Like, I think it's really important for us to bring those stories to light and have other folks understand and realize that we're a community that really wants to be supportive of each other, and we don't have to look to, I don't know, other things that may not be a part of your life, right? Like
Totally.
so
Totally. Yeah, it is. It's the representation, it's the connection. I mean, pretty much everyone who's been on the show touches in some way on migration or immigration, as a part of their story, as a part of their family struggle and things like that. So I think that's also relevant, especially right now, so yeah, it's good. Yay! So again, thank you so much,
Thank
Doctora
you.
Judith Rocha of Chicagoland. Thank you for joining today. For folks who are listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. You can find the Gold Hoops and God podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, be it Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, all the places. And there's going to be a video available of the conversation on YouTube. There's also a YouTube channel. So, you can follow me on Instagram at goldhoops_God. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Ciao.
Take care.